Yo. I started to record this video, and then I took a break and started it over. But as the name implies, this is not going to be a Pokemon video. It's not going to be any sort of game or any joke or anything like that. I wanted to talk about something, probably my biggest hobby or creative passion, and that's writing. Some of you that know me know that I write. A few of you have read some of the stuff that I've wrote. And, I mean, I've written a lot of things. I've written short stories. I have a web comic I might show on this channel one day that I used to publish. I've written a hell of a lot of posts. But the project that I have up on the screen is something I've been working on for about about 3 years. Eventually, in the middle of it, I just deleted the whole thing and I started again. And the version that I'm on right now is, I would say it's my magnum opus. You know, I'm going for that. Nah, I'm fucking around. But it is the project that I've poured my soul into the most.
Where are we going?
In my whole life.
We're going on a little excursion into the realm of pure imagination.
It is a novel called Some Beach Somewhere. The name actually comes from a racehorse.
Suppose many people believe in something
Turn this down just a little.
possibly real.
A racehorse would run at the track. I'm a pretty big fan of horse racing. My dad is a huge fan of horse racing. I have a lot of memories as a kid of going to the track with him, buying the programs and, you know, doing all of those amateur mathematics on the page, trying to figure out, you know, where the grocery money is best risked. We had a good time, man. The racetrack is still, in a lot of places, like a time capsule, you know. People are smoking inside and shit. Everyone there is 73 years old, diabetic. They're drinking. I mean, it's fun. It's fun. One of the best days of my life, actually, was when I went to the Belmont with a few buddies of mine. But that's neither here nor there. The project, Some Beach Somewhere, that I'm working on right now is it is a novel. It's going to end up being around 80 to 90,000 words, which is standard novel size. And I just wanted to introduce it and show you guys a little bit of my writing process and some of the stuff that I really have to put my head into as I'm working on this. So, Some Beach Somewhere is the story of an author. A man in his 30s who's got some degree of renown from his works, from his writing. And where the story starts, right here in chapter 1, I'm sorry for talking about this. Our protagonist is in the middle of a storm, maybe. he has withdrawn a lot. His social circles, his friends, and his family are having difficulty connecting with him. He's moved across the entire world, even living in Australia while he is an American. Even his work is suffering, as his publisher is constantly trying to pull more blood from the stone, and it's just not coming. What a lot of them don't know as the story starts is that the author is not doing this for fun. He doesn't want to be as alone as he is. But there's a sort of paradoxical, almost kind of like a thorny relationship between him and the ones that he loves. Where he can admire and want to be with them. But something about it, something about grabbing onto those relationships, it cuts. And it's only ever a temporary solution. And here in part 1, the author, well, I take you through a normal episode of his, where he meets a woman, he falls in love with her, he feels enamored with her, and for a moment, it all looks like there might be some hope, right? Perhaps the message is show sincerity in your life, in your love, and good things will come. But, and I hate really to say this, I, as a person, do not really believe that people can change. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think that it's meaningless to struggle against your flaws. In fact, I might even go the other direction and say that might be the only meaningful thing there is to do, is to push back against, your pettiness, your insecurities, your weaknesses, your anger, all of those things. I think it's very meaningful to try and fix those things about yourself. But if I was a betting man, and I am, I wouldn't put money on it for most anyone. And so the author falls into old and bad and horrible and sad patterns pretty easily. When we meet him, he's in the midst of a months even long codeine binge. He's taking Xanax, every time he blinks. And when the chance presents itself, he's drinking. Way more than is healthy or reasonable. And he meets Shay. That's the name of the woman that we meet that I met in Australia. And Shay she's everything that I might want to be, or that you or the author, whoever, might want to be. She's athletic and beautiful and gregarious, and she's not insecure. She doesn't have those voices bouncing around inside her head over and over and over. But the author does. And so we get, 33 pages in whatever this bogus version of Word is. And that's our part 1. It ends with the author on his way back to the United States. In part 2, we meet and are introduced to a character named Autumn. And Autumn was originally dreamt up as the complement of the author. Everything that he wanted but could not be. Not in a way like Shay, not where she was always this strong and kind person, but rather someone who was able to overcome those challenges within himself or herself or whatever. Autumn was brilliant, but kept few close friends, right, at first. And she was sure of herself. And the author is not, right? This sort of back and forth, oh, I want to be that way. And in the first draft of Some Beach Somewhere, the idea was that the two of them, or rather Autumn, would form that sort of puzzle piece. But it didn't work. And it didn't work because I don't believe that can happen. And I think it's even cruel from the perspective of the broken one to want someone to fill a void within them, to make them whole, to teach them how to live. I think that's cruel because they don't deserve to be in the orbit of a star that's going to collapse, you know? And so instead I rewrote the whole story. And in part 2 now, Autumn is the same story in a different language. She can't explain herself the way that the author can. She's young in the part that we know her. She graduates high school midway through her part, and we start with her birth. And she succeeds at things so easily. She's smart. She can interact with people through, that's a long story, but she always has a good joke and can talk shit with the best of her friends. But you wouldn't eat a piece of bread if there was a moldy part in the middle, you know? You could cut it out and theoretically eat around it. And in some circumstances, people do that. And Autumn has that rot inside of her. She's a bad person. She doesn't mean to be. She just doesn't understand herself at all. And she makes up for it by imitating and taking the faces of other people and putting them on herself and saying, this is the person that you want to interact with, right? This is who you want me to be, right? And that's all well and good until it's not. Until it breaks. Autumn's story is, as of right now, I think the finest piece of writing I have ever done. I hope that I don't say that by the end of the novel. I hope I get better. But I do think it is pretty well and strongly written. and I used some really neat narrative techniques. And that takes us through part 2 of the story. What I am working on now is part 3. And this is what I want to talk about today. In part 3, the author has decided to move back to America. Autumn, well, I won't give away her story, but her story has concluded in a way that leaves her ready to start the next chapter. And so I need to write part 3. Now, I have an idea where this all ends. And it's not... I wish it might go a different way. But I have to write the story that... I have to tell the truth. And so in chapter 12, we're calling this one Nirvana. Because I need to give myself a glimpse of hope. The author finds himself on a plane. And I'm going to go through the 2 paragraphs I have written and see if there's anything I really would like to change about them, and maybe see where to go for the next paragraph, how I should continue this. Now, when writing, I'm just going to be blunt. I am typically extremely under the influence. Which I wouldn't say extremely right now, but I think we can still do something here. I have a very distinctive writing voice, too. I do it on purpose. There's a meta-narrative going on here, which I think is very important. And part 1 and part 3 are both in first person from the author's point of view. So I start wanting to set the stage. Let's start with the first sentence. I want the reader, who has just now spent, 20,000 words with Autumn, and we're coming back to the author, I want them to remember what state he was in when he left Australia. And he's on the plane and he's withdrawing. That's what's going on here. So we start with: a tear coalesced in the corner of my right eye and tickled my cheek as it slothfully fell. I'm not a huge fan of slothfully here. Let's just delete it. A tear coalesced in the corner of my right eye and tickled my cheek when it fell. So small change, but that sounds a little bit better. You could use both, but I'm trying to convey some degree of passage of time. My respite was concluded, and the muscles surrounding my eyes contemplated suicide as they were asked to open. So, this part, I used some pretty strong words towards the end. We'll get to those. My respite was concluded. What I mean there is, he was high, getting on the plane, but that's a long fucking ride from Sydney to Los Angeles or whatever. That high is going to fade, and the rest of the flight is going to be fucking miserable. So, I still like this. My respite was concluded. The reader should understand kind of what's going on. And the muscles surrounding my eyes contemplated suicide I think that's strong. I love to anthropomorphize things. I love to give human characteristics to things that aren't quite human. And I love to use vibe and feeling and the flow of words to sort of suggest what I mean to get at. So here, think about it. Have you ever been really fucking hungover? Like, you just want to throw up, you just want to claw your eye out, but for one reason or another, you have to open them and you have to keep going. I think contemplated suicide, giving agency to the muscles surrounding the author's eye, is strong, and then as they were asked to open, just concludes what scene I need to set. 10 million miles above the Pacific, my brain jostled. The functions and purposes it had once known, now strangers. And little packets of photons forced themselves in and up to my retinas, who worked overtime to make sense of it all. So, I mean, the point of the sentence is obvious. I don't feel good. I'm annoyed at the fact of even having to look at the world. 10 million miles. I like this phrasing here. I do this a ton. I will make up huge numbers, and I will assume that the reader understands I am being, tongue-in-cheek with it. I'm above the Pacific, so I am still on my flight back. My brain jostled. You all know that feeling. You ever hit like a little patch of turbulence and you just kind of feel it in your head? And the brain jostling means that the functions and purposes that the brain once knew, they were strangers now. So I'm doing that thing again where I give agency to a body part. And I use that a lot in Some Beach Somewhere, especially when the author is the perspective character. Because I want him to come across, to feel like a hopeless character. So hopeless, so put upon, so worn down, that his body parts aren't even under his control. They're these actors, these beings that are just doing what they need to do to kind of lurch through the day. So I'm going to keep doing that. You'll see as you write, or as you read anything I write. I love this as a theme, or as a linguistic flourish, rather. And little packets of photons forced themselves in and up my retinas, who worked overtime to make sense of it all. So the latter part is just me using that technique again. Little packets of photons is kind of curious phrasing here, but I like it. I love being sprinkling in, let's say, like scientific jargon to really just kind of draw this dichotomy, right? This he's mechanical in one sense, but he's a human, really. This one I don't like a ton. So, a constant and consistent and endless hum of air encircled the cabin, and myself came more into being. We'll do the part after the semicolon in a second. I like the first part. So, one technique that you can use if you want to make a scene feel like breathless, right? Like it's going 1,000,000 miles a minute, there's an overwhelming amount of things going on, is to do this double and. So you'll use 3 descriptions, 3 adjectives, and you'll connect it with 2 ands. You were probably told in English class, I know I was, that you're not supposed to do that. It should be a constant, like in English class, they would have it like this: a constant, consistent, and endless hum of air. But that's weaker here. Instead, a constant and consistent and endless hum of air. That is better. It feels more like, fucking Christ, I just woke up with a hangover, right? So, endless hum of air. Insert this. I'm not a huge fan of an endless. We'll keep it for now, but I'm probably gonna end up changing this. I just can't think of anything at the moment. It encircled the cabin, and myself came more into being. So what I'm trying to get at with that sentence is, The idea that you are only a perceptive organism when you're coming into contact with other things, right? If you were floating in the endless void of space and there was no light hitting your eyes, you wouldn't be able to tell or feel or sense anything. In this case, air in a sterile cabin is meant to be the analog there, but I don't like this phrasing, and myself came more into being. So let's think it through. Consonants. Let's just be more, like, grotesque with it. Encircled the cabin. And my skin. Okay, cool. I actually do like that. A constant and consistent and endless hum of air encircled the cabin, and my skin contorted as it did. So think of, like, when you involuntarily flex up, right? Like, tense your muscles. I tried very hard to stop crying, but I don't think I was successful. I think that's strong as it is. A man named Van Dyke had shown me to my seat in the back row of the plane, and by the grace of God, I'd been lucky enough to avoid anyone to my left or right. This phrasing is probably jumps out. It's very weird. A man named Van Dyke, what does that mean to anything? I am ultimately going with a theme in this chapter of the Divine Comedy. Kind of hence Nirvana. What I'm going to do is the first part of the chapter is going to mirror Dante's descent into hell. And for those of you who've not read the Divine Comedy or Inferno, which is the first part, Dante is a poet and it's written in like the 1300s. He walks through the gates of hell and he goes down all the layers, and he is guided by a poet named Virgil. Virgil is a Roman poet that wrote the Aeneid, so he was kind of like Homer, just for the Romans. I didn't want to be so blatant so as to name the character Virgil, because he's going to be some guide through hell here, or at least showing them into the plane, which I'm going to use as hell. And there is a theme that I get to, not a theme, but just kind of a consistent in-universe thing. I'm a very big Liverpool FC fan, and that comes up a lot in the story. Virgil van Dyke is one of the best defenders the club has ever had. So a man named Van Dyke, Virgil, had shown me to my seat in the back row of the plane, and by the grace of God, so I'm kind of making it pretty clear I'm going to be doing a Christian thing in this episode, this chapter. By the grace of God, I'd been lucky enough to avoid anyone to my left or right. That sets the scene a little bit. This sentence is actually a little funny in some respects. It sets the scene. I don't want characters directly next to him as he's sort of retching and miserable from this codeine withdrawal. And this actually happened. When I flew home from Australia, I got really lucky and there was no one in the left or the right. And I sat in the middle row. It was quite nice. Couples snoring on one another's shoulders were dotted up and down the aisle, their heartbeat asynchronous with mine, which was now going about 1 million times each minute. So I just want to really dive into the mood of the piece. So you've got the author who is kind of pointedly alone here, right? And he's miserable, and he's sick, and his heart rate is way faster than it's probably healthy. And as he wakes up in this hangover, this withdrawal on the plane, he looks around and he sees, women with their heads on the shoulder of their boyfriends, and little kids watching TV in the lap of their parents. It's kind of pointedly different to him. And that discord, that contrast is kind of one of the themes of hell in this case, right? I am alone with nobody and in all this pain, and seemingly everyone else is calm and happy and peaceful and serene. I really like the phrasing in this sentence. Couples snoring on one another's shoulders were dotted up and down the aisle. It paints a clear picture. Everyone is calm and sleepy and tired and happy to be with one another. Their heartbeats asynchronous with mine. I think that's strong phrasing. And then I conclude it with, which was now going about 1 million times a minute. I'm going to change going to pumping. I feel like beating would be too cliche there, so now pumping about 1 million times each minute. I spat on the ground in front of me and hoped nobody had seen. A knot was being delicately and forcefully kneaded in my upper abdomen as I prayed for an end to this trip. Okay. So I want to make him gross, right? I don't know if you guys have ever withdrawn from drugs before, but it's not the greatest feeling in the world. You are really sick all the time to your stomach. I spat on the ground in front of me. This bile is already coming up his chest and into his throat and his mouth. So he's so despondent that he's just throwing away social rules and behaving like even a human at this point. And he spits in front of him onto the ground of the plane. A knot was being delicately and forcefully kneaded in my upper abdomen. I love this technique of doing two completely contrasting adverbs or adjectives right next to one another. The knot, you can sort of picture it, and it's someone working in this heinous way, kind of destroying your intestines. And they're doing it hard, but they're getting everything in the right place. It's being kneaded in the upper abdomen. And as I prayed for an end to this trip, is kind of clear. Instinctually, I ran my hand through my bag, hoping that there'd be a Hail Mary bottle of codeine. But causality doesn't work that way, and it wasn't there. But what was there was more withdrawal. So, I mean, I think it's just to the point, right? I'm so desperate for a little bit of relief from this misery that I'm going and hoping that there's more drugs just sitting in my bag. But even though I'd hope it, even though I want it to be there, causality, the cause and effect, one thing to the other, it doesn't work that way, and it wasn't there. But what I did find was more withdrawal. So I'm pretty happy with those now. Aside from a few phrasing things, but I always figure I can come back to those. I reread these 1 trillion times. Let's see, is there anything that comes to mind to be written here? So where does the story need to go next? Well, he's ultimately going to be introduced to a character called Beatrice. I will either call her B or Trixie. Beatrice is the guide who took Dante in the last leg of his journey in the third part, Paradiso, or Paradiso, one of the others. She is an angelic figure, someone that Dante loved in real life. Virgil, as he was a pagan, was not allowed to go into heaven, the Christian heaven, so Beatrice had to do it for him. We will have a flight attendant character as this chapter goes on, named one of these things. I like Trixie a little bit. I like that contrast of low and high. It's obvious what I'm going at from a literary reference, but Trixie is sort of, like a very, I don't want to say common name, but it's an average name, right? So let's see if we could get 1 or 2 sentences in, and then I'll call this. I just want to give an introduction to writing and kind of let everyone know this is something that I love. Let me just think for a minute. Okay. My head hung hopelessly. I love alliteration. My head hung hopelessly against the back of the seat in front of me, and its passenger stirred from time to time, which sent a jolt of misery down my skull and into the nape of my neck. I like this, like, kind of really, like, in their body feeling, because I really want the reader to kind of understand what this feels like. No, that doesn't work. Okay. I like this. I do, actually, as a paragraph. So I'm just going to give it a quick read out loud, and then eventually I'll come back and I'll edit this much the same way I just did the other two paragraphs. And this is the pattern. I just do a little bit. I make sure that it is the way I want it to be. And that's how I write. So let's just read this one out loud. My head hung hopelessly against the back of the seat in front of me, and its passenger stirred from time to time, which sent a jolt of misery down my skull and into the nape of my neck. I twisted to the side and tried to look out the window, muttering a breathless prayer for something to assuage me. To assuage me, but all I could see was black. Thin, anemic clouds twisted themselves around the plain periodically, but the moment I noticed them, they'd be gone, and it felt like the stars themselves were laughing at me. Bile and acid bubbled against my esophagus, and the flight attendant said she'd be back with some water but never came. This is hell, I thought.